Gaming over politics. That's all the gamers want when it comes to the products that are coming to the player base, whether it's PC or console. We want something that is focused on our wants and needs, and that's what we're hearing from Korean-based developer Nexon, as they state they are more focused on gamer feedback rather than data or political leanings. And this is the type of confidence we want to see in a developer, where they know where their focus should be, and that should be their player base. And I think that's exactly what we're hearing from Nexon and a lot of Asian developers, where they realize we have to feed the customers because the customers are feeding us back with their purchases. And of course, this leads back to a positive feedback loop where you get that reciprocation from the fans, where they are rewarding you with more purchases within your game's development environment. And I think this is the perfect situation we saw in previous generations for game developers, where they listened to the gamers. After a game failed, they proceeded to make something better than their original or something entirely different that actually catered to the taste of the player base. But in the modern day video gaming age, that is the negative thing to do nowadays, with companies and developers focused on consultancy firms and political activism. We get the opposite response from game developers, where it's not about the game player feedback and it's more oriented towards database driven resources or political driven resources. And those two options seem to be the primary options in the Western games development sphere. You can see this with the most recent developments with Helldivers 2, which is a game that opened to much fanfare and fun for being oriented towards making a new environment and new world interesting to the customer base. And of course, it garnered loads of players joining the game, and this was something that was heralded upon its release. But much later on, based on data-driven updates and patches, the game ultimately deteriorated in quality. And you can see that with the lack of player base growing after every patch update that took away some of the fun elements in the game, nerfing some primary weapons that they deemed unbalanced and them destroying those weapons to make what they deemed to be a more interesting game to themselves, but not to the player base. And this resulted to overall collapsing to the player base for Helldivers 2. And this is data-driven overall feedback that is a primary source for a lot of developers nowadays that are not focused on politically driven nonsense. And I think this is a situation we saw with Helldivers 2, where they just lost themselves in the data and forgot about the fun of the game. And I think that's essentially what you don't want to see in the gaming industry, where you're just focused on data and numbers, but not the actual fun the game players are having. Of course, over time, after the player base collapsed to abysmally low 10,000 players, they eventually reoriented and focused on making fun patches for the game players. And I think the result is they're getting a little bit of the player base back, but not enough, I would say, to equal their highest highs of over 400,000 people playing. But all in all, that's just showing the faulty premise of data-driven feedback in the gaming environment. And you can go back to what we saw with this game itself and other games as well that just focused on the data they had rather than the customer base and what they actually want. And of course, you want to go to the worst version of analysis of your customer base, you can go to the political version, and that goes back to Sweet Baby Inc. and Kim Belair, the CEO of that company, where they're more focused on injecting their own political statements onto the game player base, resulting in producing games of a substandard quality, but overall a potent message to the fan base themselves. And of course, this ignores the quality of the game that they're producing. This ignores the overall coherence of the story. This ignores everything that would appeal to a game player, the overall look and character designs. It's not about that. It's about the political messaging that you want to inject into the fan base. And this is the worst type of feedback you can get, where it's not about feedback from the gamers, it's about feedback from a political class of people that do not play games. And these are the two aspects that we see in the Western games development sphere, where we have this overall focus on data or political feedback. It's not about the players actually playing the games feedback. And I think that's the crazy thing that we're seeing now, and it's astonishing to hear a developer in Korea say the opposite of that. We have Nexon, where they're talking about the rise in development costs and how they keep that under control. An executive in an interview with a gaming magazine within Korea said, "We just focus on user feedback, not the numbers or data or anything outside of that. We focus on what the gamers and the players want, and we try to deliver that, and hopefully they reciprocate that with purchasing more product or more interest in our games themselves. And this is the logical, business-minded way you should be doing things, but that logic has kind of been thrown out the window, whether it's the over-analyzing of user data or goes to the political-driven causes that some entities within the West want to impose on the gamers. So we have this dichotomy here in the West that ignores the player base at the detriment of the entirety of their company. And I think that is the result of what we're seeing with the massive closures within the US market and beyond, because we have this data-driven or political-driven market. And in Korea, one of the companies that are rising in Korea, Nexon, that just made hundreds of millions of dollars on their release with the first Descendant. You have Shift Up that just became $1 billion company within that time frame, within a year, releasing multiple successful projects. Of course, you have China doing the similar thing, and they're all focused on customer feedback, because what the customers want could earn them millions of dollars, and it has. And you can see that dichotomy shift with the East. You can see these two giant companies in Korea profiting off this overall philosophy of focusing on customer feedback. The same thing happened with Stellar Blade. It had problems with its overall release and censorship, but they listened to player feedback and they started producing content that was less censored and less restricted. And of course, that led to explosion in sales for the company itself, and it sold its stock at over a 516% profit. And that is just the rewards that players will give you if you follow their overall feedback. And that is reflecting back on Nexon, who's the developer of the first Descendant, who saw record number sales for the company itself with its initial release. And I think this is the situation that the game environment usually operated, with user feedback, play testing, and actually contact with real gamers. And that is just something that is sorely lacking in the West, with a lot of these companies not even focusing on play testing their games before releasing them to the market. And this usually leads to a buggy mess that the players have to go through themselves without actually enjoying the game. And this is the result that we've been seeing in the Western gaming environment. Needless to say, that having these data-driven disasters and these political-driven disasters, it's leading to an overall off-putting situation for the gamers, where we're just tired of seeing companies make games focused on data that has nothing to do with the happiness of the gamer, or focusing on political driven action that has absolutely nothing to do with what the gamers are even thinking about. And of course, Nexon just focusing on what the gamers want and their feedback is leading to massive success, and maybe lead other developers to do similar things. And that's what I'm hoping for overall, because what we've been seeing consistently from Nexon in the first Descendant, even though it's a highly expensive game, we see them delivering what the game players want and delivering it as fast as possible, and you can't knock them for that. And I love that the developers, executives there, even though the company has a bad reputation for price gouging and just making an obscene amount of profits over DLC and microtransactions, they do know what the player base wants, and they actually give them what they want, and that's why they're allowed to make a massive profit from it. And I hope the Western game developers learn a little bit from them. Not everything. I don't want gigantic high prices for everything, but ultimately that is the right way to go. But it's nice to see a developer focused on at least player feedback, which is something that is just not happening nowadays. But you tell me what you think about the situation. What do you think about Nexon actually trying to focus on game player feedback over politics and data-driven analysis? I think that's the old-fashioned way, and we should go back to some old-fashioned ways to have some old-fashioned success in a declining video gaming market. But maybe you disagree with me. Let me hear your thoughts. Like, comment, share, subscribe. This is Wagner Knows Why. Catch you next time.